The following content is for entertainment and educational purposes only. It does not constitute means for diagnosis, healthcare advice, nor treatment. Make use of a qualified healthcare professional for such purposes.
How is it that we can read an introduction of an article? What is it that we can expect from an introduction? Whenever, let's assume that you conducted your search, you liked the article, you read that abstract, you're like, okay, this is exactly what I'm looking for. Let me move forward. Let me read the introduction of said article. The first thing that you're going to find in an introduction is the actual topic, right? The actual topic that you are interested in, the topic that the researcher looked into. Notice that I had previously defined a construct, right? You're going to find that topic because it's not good enough to use the title that you would find in a dictionary, the term that you will find in a dictionary, the term that you will find as a layperson. Think about the term love. Therefore, if I wanted to conduct research about love, I had to operationally define it. That is what we call a construct. That term that you have operationally defined is that construct. Notice that that is what you would find in scientific literature. So say in an example that I gave you earlier about love, and I'm looking into love and romantic relationships in students, and I had defined it as how much quality time they spend together. Then I will have to define what quality time is, right? I have to operationally define it so it becomes a construct. Time they spend watching TV, going out, and having sex. Those are going to be the three aspects that I'm going to use to operationally define my construct. I do need you to keep in mind that usually this definition does not come from out of a hat, right? Just like a magician would pull out a rabbit. Usually you would use previous research to find the definition of your construct. Generally, you would use previous research to define your construct. So that definition you would find in your introduction. Very, very importantly, you're going to find in the introduction the gap. You're going to identify that gap. That researcher is going to identify the gap in the literature. And you will listen to this term. What is the gap in the literature? What is the gap in the literature? You will listen to this term till the end of your days if you stay in psychology. The intention of research is to fill a gap. The intention of any point of research is to identify the gap. Because remember that science, the good thing about science is that it can be revised, right? That's why we know that the earth is not flat, right? Because research could be revised. That's why we need to look into identifying that gap. What are we missing? What is the unknown? And in the introduction, you would find this is what we sought to answer. This is the gap that I could not find previously in other research. In the case of my research, the gap in the literature was any other religion other than Islam. I could not find information about religious discrimination in, say, Baptists or Catholics. So notice that in the introduction, I would have to present, this is the gap. This is what I could not find. And this is what my research here is intending to answer. So that's the information you will find in the introduction. Any questions about that?
Is it required for researchers to say specifically the gap is, like, you have to use that terminology, or is it just that?
Sometimes you will find it, and sometimes you will find the gap in the literature. But sometimes you won't find it like that. So common terms can be like, this study sought to answer. The purpose of this study is, in previous research, we found this, but we didn't find that. So generally, you'll find that type of wording in the introduction. But sometimes they will spell it out quite directly. This is the gap. But you can find something like, this is what we sought to answer. The study's aim was X, Y, Z. Yes, ma'am.
Is that what you want us to do, to specify this is the gap so that it's clear, or?
Oh, I love it. Absolutely. This is the gap of the literature. Perfect. And we're on the same page. So I love it. Research is already difficult as is. Research is already difficult. It takes many years and many lectures and many classes for you to understand research. So the easier you can present it, the better. Something else that you're going to find in the literature, in the introduction, I should say, is the literature review. The literature review simply means previous research. That's what that means. Literature review, you can equate that to previous research. In order for you to conduct your research, you need to know what others have published before you. This is actually where you will spend most of your time, by the way. Whenever you write your own research, you have to find out what hasn't or has been published. Not only is that going to allow you to identify the gap, but it's also going to give you a theoretical understanding. Right? It's going to give you a theoretical understanding, a theoretical model that you're going to use later on. What are the models that you can utilize in order to interpret your research? The next thing that you will find in an introduction is the hypothesis. Hypotheses are important because they offer a prediction. The intent of a hypothesis is to predict. And as I mentioned earlier, psychology is in the business of predicting behavior. If I know what normal is, I can predict abnormal. If I know what abnormal is, I can predict normal. So notice that we have a hypothesis in order to offer a prediction. In every research, you're going to find said hypothesis. So for example, I can say in our fictitious study about love and college students, I can say in my hypothesis, the more quality time these individuals show, so for example, playing board games, how many hours they play board games or video games, how many hours they watch TV together, how many times a week they have sex, the more reported or perceived satisfaction they have with their relationship. That is a prediction. The more X, the more Y. The less X, the less Y, right? So that's the intent of a hypothesis. Because your research is going to seek whether or not I'm going to accept that or I'm going to reject that hypothesis. Notice that your hypothesis has to be justified. Has to be justified based on previous findings. Do they follow logically the literature review? Does my null hypothesis, H superscript O or 0, and alternate hypothesis, H superscript A, do they actually follow the literature? In this fictitious study, I can't say the more they have sex, the less satisfaction they report in their relationship. That doesn't sound substantiated by research. I'm sure if you and I were to sit right now and conduct research, conduct a short literature review about couple satisfaction, it's probably likely that the more satisfied they are with their sexual encounters with their partner, the more satisfaction they may report in the relationship. But if I were to say in my hypothesis, well, the more sex they have, the less happy they're going to be, that prediction does not sound scientifically sound. And it's probably not going to be substantiated by that previous literature review. Something that I need to remind you of is that sometimes the introduction is not going to be labeled plain white, right? Just like we mentioned earlier, sometimes you will find the gap of the literature is, but sometimes you won't find that labeled introduction. However, it will be the first thing that you see after your abstract. notice that in the introduction, we're going to have the background of the study. For example, notice that we also have previous literature that substantiates how we tend to block distraction and therefore reduce the chances of test anxiety and poor performance in your exam. Notice that the introduction continues to explain previous literature, right? So we're talking about previous literature and their distraction and being tempted with a distraction. Notice that it is also going to mention the particular goal of the research and their prediction. So their prediction is, in this implementation of intentions, they are striving to increase accessibility to those situational cues that are going to lead to their interpretation of that test, that are going to lead to less and reduced test anxiety. So if you notice within the introduction, you will have those common elements. Are there any questions about that? One of the last things that I like to mention is that within your document, you're going to find this tiny number here, the DOI. Not to be confused with the DUI. Don't have jail fund. Have enough fun, but don't have jail fund. Like, you can freaking land you in jail, don't do it. You know what I mean? Not to be confused with DUI. The digital object identifier, think about it as a social security number. Each article has one. And that's the number that you would use should you want to retrieve that article later on. Because chances are, if you use the title, there are many articles that can have a similar name or a similar title. Therefore, if you use the DOI, it's going to be very specific to the article. It's basically like a social security number.